So again, welcome everybody. Hopefully you're here for this RFP announcement, and we will have about 20 minutes, ideally at the end, maybe 15 if it takes us a little while to get through the content to answer questions in real time. And you'll be invited at that point to either unmute and ask your question or type your question into the chat. That said, since we have three of us here today who are from the project team, if you have questions along the way that you would like to enter into the text Q&A, you can do so, and one of us who's not speaking will do our best to respond to that question in real time as well. So just a couple tech housekeeping things before we get started. If you would like closed captioning, you're available to do that by just clicking the CC button on your own screen. You can also use, as I mentioned, the question and answer window to type your questions in, and one of us will respond to you at our earliest opportunity. And today's webinar will be recorded and posted on our project website. And at the end, we're also planning to do a written compilation of the questions that were asked during the webinar so that people who were not able to attend this right now in person are able to easily access those as well. So if any of you would like to follow along with the RFP, you're welcome to do so by either accessing that QR code that's on the slide now or directly the link underneath it. What we're going to be doing today is mostly going through not only the logistical details of the RFP, but some of the overall purpose for what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this project. So again, welcome. I wanted to just introduce not only myself, I mentioned who I am, but I have two co-investigators, Alexia Kulik from the School for Workers and Laura Dresser, who is from the High Road Strategy Center, who are part of our project team from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'll also ask both Beth and Reese to unmute for just a minute to introduce themselves before we move forward.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Beth Katz, Executive Director of Food Insight Group.
And hey, everyone. My name is Reese Lyerly, and I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation with the Chef Hand Foundation. We're excited to have you here.
Okay, so today we're going to give an overview of this project as a whole. So this is a 3-year cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Services. So we'll talk a little bit about what our role as the cooperators looks like within this project and what the role of subgrantees looks like within this project as well. And then we'll talk about some of the priority funding areas that we identified through a series of listening sessions and review of the literature that we accomplished over this past summer. Then we'll talk a little bit about one of the things that we're really trying to focus on through this RFP, which is centering worker-centered approaches to research on the topic of school food workers. And then lastly, we'll go through some of the logistical details around what sort of things are required for a complete application and how to submit it, including some screenshots of what it will actually look like when you enter the application portal. And then lastly, Q&A. So overview of our project as a whole. So this project, in terms of the 3-year overarching cooperative agreement that Reese and Beth and I are working on, really exists to address 3 major research questions. So first is, what is the current state of the school food workforce in the United States and the structure of their jobs? So for this particular call for proposals, we're specifically looking at the K-12 school food workforce. So that could include people in both public and private schools. And really that is who we would think of as the workforce as a whole. That said, we're really focused on workers who are in programs like the National School Breakfast Program and National School Lunch Program and Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. So the programs that are federal child nutrition programs that work specifically in the context of schools, unlike, for instance, some people may be familiar with summer feeding, which can be in community sites as well. So those are things that are important to keep in mind in terms of we're really focused on the school-based workforce, understanding who they are and what their jobs actually look like. And then from there, how do we actually understand recruitment, retention, and job satisfaction for these different workers? Because they're employed across a lot of different geographical contexts in the United States and directly by schools and sometimes through food service management companies, there are a lot of different things that might come up that really structure what their employment looks like. So we're really interested in looking at how recruitment, retention, and job satisfaction is impacted by the characteristics of their specific school food authority, so the entity that they are working for, and the employment structure under which they are currently working. And then lastly, one of the things that I find very exciting about how the USDA framed this call for a cooperative agreement is that they really wanted to think about not just the workforce as it currently stands, but what it actually would take to develop a stable and respected school food workforce that's equipped to provide nutritious meals to students while supporting resilient local and regional food systems. So for those of you who maybe are unfamiliar with the world of school food, it is a low-wage occupation. It's primarily women. So about 93% of the workforce is women, and they tend to be older than food service workers in general. So we know some things about the workforce as a whole, and we know that a lot of school food service departments around the country really have experienced increasing challenges with recruitment and retention post-pandemic. But what we're trying to do with this project is not just to sort of provide a description around what this workforce looks like, but to also actively reimagine what we need to do in order to create the workforce that this program really needs. So to give you all a sense of where we're at, we began listening sessions with a number of school food stakeholders over the summer. So we had about 65 people participate from all around the country in those listening sessions and really used their expertise and their experiences to help create priorities for this subgrant process. Along with completing a literature review. And for those of you who have looked at the RFP already, you'll see some of the literature that we reviewed for this project in the appendices at the end of the RFP. And for those of you who maybe haven't looked at it yet, and also are maybe new to the world of school food research, hopefully that resource will be useful for you all as you ground yourselves in what existing research looks like on this topic. So between 2024 and 2025, we'll be in this process of basically soliciting subgrant proposals and receiving those proposals. And then in June of 2025, we have an anticipated start date for subgrant awards. And those awards can be for up to 18 months. So if you look at the RFP a little bit more closely, you'll notice that we have a flexible timeline. We want to accommodate projects that maybe don't need an entire 18 months to be accomplished. So when you're thinking about applying for this opportunity, think about what the scope of work is that you would like to propose. But know that it would be a maximum of 18 months for that project work period, and that all of the subgrantees in the 18th month of that time period would be meeting together with us and USDA FNS to share the results of the subgrant projects altogether. So those subgrant projects, for the most part, we anticipate would be continuing through at least a portion of 2026, and all of them would need to end by November 30th of 2026. And then it would be the responsibility of me and Beth and Reese and Alexia and Laura and other members of the project team to summarize all of that material from the different subgrant projects into a synthesis report for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and to make available publicly the data from those different subgrant projects, as well as any of the analysis that we've done as well. So that's the overall timeline for the project. A few things to keep in mind. I mentioned already that the workforce that we're interested in, certainly many people are involved in getting food onto children's plates, but we're specifically interested in the people who are directly employed within the context of school food programs. And in terms of the geography, because this is a national project, we're most interested in funding national level studies or projects that include comparisons across multiple regions. This map shows some of the ways that you could choose to think about regions. You can also think about it in different ways. This map is just from the US Department of Agriculture, how they've divided up the United States into different regions for management underneath school food authorities. So this is kind of one way to slice it. There's certainly others as well, but we would want to be funding projects that are either national or at least multi-state and multi-region comparisons. The methods that researchers may use are open. So quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, experimental, community engaged. We're open to a variety of methods. It really is just what is most suited to the research questions that you all would be proposing through the subgrant process. And it's also flexible in terms of what sort of data sources people are using. If people are proposing to collect original data or secondary data, both of those would be fine to do. It just depends upon the context of the specific project that you are proposing. And we wanted to just flag that if anyone feels like they have some of the technical expertise to work on this topic, but is less familiar with what sort of data exists, we are available for conversation around potential data sources, particularly if you're newer to the world of school food research. It might be a good idea to reach out to us to discuss what sort of resources you might be able to draw from. So applicant eligibility. This particular subgrant opportunity is open to single organizations and collaborative teams. If you do plan on doing this as a collaborative team, you'll need to identify one lead partner who will be responsible for communicating with us and complying with all of the reporting requirements of subgrantees. So that lead partner does have to meet one of the following eligibility requirements of being a public or private academic or research organization, a not-for-profit organization, or a state or local government entity. That said, you can also kind of think through how you're conceptualizing your project team. Organizations that are partnering in the project should be listed as subrecipients or contractors as appropriate. And if you have multiple partners, you'll want to make sure that you're explaining their roles, both in the application and the budget narrative. You would also, for example, if you're proposing doing any kind of community engaged work, include community partners who are compensated for their time in this category within the application and budget narrative. So a few key dates and parameters. The RFP was released on December 2nd. Here we are today on December 18th. You all are here at the informational webinar or viewing it a little bit later on. We are asking just so that we have a sense of what sort of projects people are thinking about, and so that we ensure that we have done our work in terms of making sure that this RFP is disseminated widely and that we have a really high quality pool of applications. We're asking people to submit a very brief letter of intent on or before January 10th. And that's a very simple Google form that you can access directly through the RFP that shouldn't take more than a couple minutes to complete, but is really useful for us in terms of planning purposes. And then applications are due on February 14th, and we're hoping in early or mid-April to announce subgrantees. And we're anticipating about 5 to 7 awards will be made through this process. So total funding available is $800,000, and we have a minimum request amount of $50,000 and a maximum request amount of $250,000. One thing that is a little different from some of the other cooperative agreements that USDA has done recently in terms of school food work is that this is a pure research grant, not project implementation, and there is no financial match required for applying for these funds. Okay, just a couple budget things. Allowable costs include salary, materials and supplies, participation incentives, stipends for advisory board members, language interpretation and translation services, food and other meeting expenses, travel for research needs or conference presentations, trainings, software, data sets, and indirect costs. Budgets may not include any reimbursement for pre-award costs or lobbying or advocacy. So just a couple quick things before I pass it over to Beth. Subgrantee responsibilities. So project design, if you were to be offered one of these awards, we would expect you to meet with us to finalize research strategy and if needed to talk with us about human subjects research protocols and also a data management plan. Subgrantees are also responsible for project management and communication, including attending a virtual kickoff, midpoint, and closeout meeting with our team. They're responsible for project implementation, so ensuring that sufficient personnel time has been budgeted to allow for project management and research activities that would be completed within the timeline that they proposed for their project. Data collection, analysis, and management would be the responsibility of the subgrantee. And then also dissemination. So creating project deliverables to disseminate main findings and recommendations. And as I mentioned earlier, participating in a scheduled meeting to share findings with the Food Nutrition Services and other subgrantees at the closeout period for this project overall. And lastly, reporting quarterly and final reports to UW-Madison, which is the lead cooperator for this agreement, and then financial management in terms of providing us with all the required documents for executing the subaward in a timely manner so that projects can ideally start in June of 2025, and then providing information that we need in order to dispense funding and track expenses as part of quarterly reporting on the university side of things. So lastly, before I pass things over to Beth, I'll just mention that we will be offering ongoing technical assistance. So this is going to be something that is of no cost to subgrantees, but would be something that if you think you'll need technical assistance, you'd want to budget into your staff time for your project proposal. There will be one mandatory meeting with us before you start the project where we'll talk through the scope of your project and make sure that we're on the same page before everyone, presses go. And then further technical assistance will be offered through bi-monthly optional office hours. And we will also facilitate opportunities for cross-project learning among subgrantees, but both of those things are optional for awardees. Okay. So I'm going to pass things over now to Beth to talk through some of our priority funding areas.
Thanks, Jen. So Jen mentioned earlier that we hosted listening sessions over the summer, and through those we learned a lot about areas of interest that could be good topics for these subawards. If you want to go to the next slide, Jen. These three research areas that we're going to talk about match the three research questions that Jen mentioned earlier. And within those, there are many topics of interest, but we've identified specific priority research areas that will be prioritized for funding. It is not a complete list. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of these research areas that has been prioritized, but you'll find a much more extensive list at the end of the RFP, and these priority areas are also identified in the RFP. So do you mind going back one? Research area A is understanding the current state of the school food workforce. So this includes, but is not limited to, descriptive statistics and analysis of workforce demographics and employment conditions, analysis of school food financing and privatization trends and their impact on labor, priorities for training and skill development, and development of data sets and/or measurement tools. So if you go to the next, you can see that we have identified three funding priorities. So these are those that will be elevated as the highest priorities for funding. Funding priority 1 within research area A is a comprehensive analysis of the existing workforce. Funding priority 2 is an analysis of the relationship between the status of the workforce and child nutrition program quality. And funding priority 3 is to identify critical skills needed for school food workers at all levels to provide nutritious meals while supporting resilient local and regional food systems. Go to the next slide and see that research area B is investigating how recruitment, retention, and job satisfaction are impacted by school or SFA level characteristics, state policy environments, and employment structure. So this includes, but is not limited to, descriptive statistics. I think this was maybe not updated. Perfect, thank you. So this is including but not limited to studying the recruitment and retention dynamics within diverse SFAs and geographies, job satisfaction, career development opportunities, etc. And the funding priorities are investigating vacancy levels, turnover rates, primary causes among program administrators and state agency personnel, analyzing recruitment barriers and strategies to overcome them, and investigating the relationship between worker satisfaction and school food program success. It's a bit more detail there. And research area C is identifying the most promising strategies for creating a stable and respected workforce equipped to provide nutritious meals to students while supporting resilient local and regional food systems. So this area includes strategies for shifting public perception of school food jobs, strategies for increasing the financial well-being of school food workers, financial solvency of child nutrition program budgets, and worker empowerment, and examining how the school food workforce may need to change to support resilient local and regional food systems. So again, we've identified top funding priorities within this category. They are exploring staffing models and compensation schemes that maximize scratch cooking capacity, labor and cost efficiencies, program quality, and job quality. Examining opportunities for fostering and sharing worker-centered and worker-led innovations in student engagement, food safety, record keeping, et cetera. And modeling the degree to which reduced turnover and higher average daily participation in meal programs may offset the cost of potential wage or hours increases for a variety of SFA types and geographies. So this is, again, sort of a quick and broad overview of the research areas of interest as well as the priority topics. And we can get a little bit deeper into the worker-centered component of the research. Hand it back over to Jen.
Thanks, Beth. And actually, before we move on, I totally forgot to do this when we first started. If you all have a moment to just introduce yourselves in the chat so we know who all is involved. We're anticipating that there's going to be some people who are real experts on school food, but don't necessarily have as much experience in labor research. And on the other side of the spectrum, people who have a lot of experience in labor research and thinking through, workforce issues more broadly, but don't necessarily have school food expertise. And then hopefully we'll help people kind of meet in the middle through some of this process. But we'd love to just get a sense of who is on the call so that we have a sense of who's interested and that you all also have a sense of who might be finding this topic interesting. So if you have a moment to enter in your name and organizational affiliation, that would be really wonderful. So I'll let you all do that in the chat as I continue to talk. So one of the things that I'm really excited about with this project is that we were able to work together as a team, thanks in large part to Laura Dresser from the Center for High Road Strategy, or High Road Strategy Center, flipped it, sorry, about what it would actually mean for this work to be worker-centered. And so we came up with 8 criteria, and we're really going to ask you all as applicants to think about how your research projects can be designed with these principles in mind. So it's not to say that we would expect everyone to have all 8 of these or even half of them, but to think about where your work would align with these and be very clear in your articulation in the proposal process of how you see your research aligning with this definition that we provided of worker-centered research. So we have 8 different criteria that we developed. The first is that worker-centered research advances worker voice, power, organizing, and/or unionization. It values the needs, experiences, and perspectives of frontline workers, emphasizes workers' existing assets, skills, and capacities for growth, looks for opportunities and potential rather than only what is lacking or problematic, understands that the structure of jobs and policies that surround jobs are an important site of intervention. This kind of research may involve workers directly in the research process through consultation across the life of a research project or deeper engagement like participatory action research. And worker-centered research also actively recognizes and engages with structural discrimination within the labor market. And lastly, informs the development of labor market policies, training, career pathways, and support services that enhance job quality. So again, we aren't expecting people to be able to say that their work aligns with all 8 of these, but to think about the alignment of their work with one or more of these different criteria that we're using to define worker-centered research. So for those of you who are a little bit newer to the world of school food, you'll want to reference Appendix B, which includes a lot of different references of recent research on the school food workforce, including some examples of worker-centered research, including peer-reviewed journal articles, industry reports, research reports, and examples of participatory action research. And then Appendix C is a document that we work to compile that has examples of worker-centered research from other fields. And that is something that we put together to help, in particular, any workers and unions that might be interested in submitting project proposals, and labor centers as well understand that their research is really welcome as well under this RFP, and to give people kind of a broader sense of the types of projects that maybe would be fundable under this request for proposals. Okay, so just a couple quick things about the development of applications. So again, I mentioned the letter of intent, optional but highly encouraged. In case you didn't believe me, that's a very simple form. This is a screenshot that shows you that it should be a very quick process for you all. These are the questions. So really the main thing is just making sure that you have an intended title of your project and have thought through the topic area and brief description of your proposed project before you submit this. So once you get through this process and are working on developing the full proposal, there are a few things that you're going to need to make sure that you have on hand in order to submit the proposal by the February 14th deadline. So the first is responses to all of the proposal narrative sections, and we'll go through that in just a minute. And if you have not gotten a chance to see this yet through the RFP, we have a Microsoft Word template that we've provided and are asking everybody to use in order to help facilitate just the process of making sure that people don't forget any sections. We also have a template for the budget and budget narrative as well that you can access through the application website. So you'll need those components as well as a 2-page maximum resume or bio sketch for each of your key project staff members, with that being a maximum of 5. We don't have a specific format that we're asking the resume or bio sketch to be in, but if you consult the RFP, you will see that there are a few things that we want to be included in the resume or bio sketch. So if you have one that you've developed for something else that's in a specific format, there's no need to redevelop it as long as it has all the components that we're asking for. So we have some flexibility there, but want to make sure that we're getting all the required pieces of information as well. And then letters of support, those are required if you are applying as part of a team. You need to have a letter of support from the partners that would be included in your project. Otherwise, letters of support are not required, but if you would like to include those, you're welcome to include letters of support from a maximum of 3 other organizations or individuals who can speak to the merits of your project. And then lastly, if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate from a federal agency, you can submit that form, and you'll need also to have a unique entity identifier number from sam.gov. So a few things to try to streamline the application process. We are not going to require financial management systems questionnaire, financial statements, IRS Form 990, or IRB approval at the time of application. If you are one of the subgrantees, we will ask for these things as necessary before a subaward is issued. But to reiterate, these things are not required at the time of application. So lastly, before I pass things over to Reese, to give you a sense of what we're looking for, the project narrative will be 8 pages maximum with 12-point font, 1-inch margins, and 1.5-inch line spacing. And you'll see this in the template that we provided, that we're asking you to first articulate research aims, and then how your project takes a worker-centered approach, to then articulate the research strategy. And this will really be the kind of bulk of the application, with it taking up about 3 pages of the total real estate. And then dissemination of findings, implementation plan, and project team. So all of those things, if you access the template that we provided, are described in further detail in terms of what we're looking for underneath those categories. But in the interest of time today, I won't go into greater depth. I'll finally just say that references do not count toward this 8-page limit. And I'm going to pass things over to Reese.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Jen. So I'm going to walk you through now what it looks like to create and submit an application in our portal. If you want to follow along, feel free to scan the QR code here or go to our bit.ly link for the USFW subgrants. This will take you to the lunchbox with the Chef Ann Foundation, where you'll be able to read more information about the subgrant and RFP process as a whole, as well as access the application portal. So next slide. So here's what it looks like when you land at the lunchbox using the QR code. There are several different places on the website where you can click apply now when you're ready to move forward. Probably the easiest place to do so is what's highlighted here in the circle in red where it says apply now by February 14th. And that will take you to our application portal, taking you away from the lunchbox website to a new place. Next slide. So when you get to the application portal, we have several active grants currently with the Chef Ann Foundation. So you want to scroll down till you see Understanding the School Food Workforce subgrant. Here will be a brief description of the grant as we've just covered for you today. And when you are ready to register and apply, you can click where it says click here in green as highlighted, and it will take you to the next step of creating an account. So next slide. As I just mentioned, so you'll have to create a username and password in order to access and navigate the application system. If you have never submitted an application to a Chef Ann Foundation supported grant at this time, you will click New User at the bottom to create a username or password. So this will be a step where you create this. And you can also, if you have previously created an account or forget to write down your password at any time, click Forgot Your Password, and it will reset that for you. So next slide. So a few notes about submitting your application. So as Jen mentioned, the lead partner will be the one who creates the account and navigates the editing and application process. As I'll show you in a future slide, once you add your project partners, they will have the ability to view the application while it's in progress, but not make any edits directly in the portal. Only the lead applicant can do so. In terms of saving and submitting your application, please note that our system does not auto-save, so you want to make sure that you press save as you navigate through it. I'll make sure to point out the save button for you when we get to a future slide. I will note that if you leave the application open for 24 hours without making any changes, it will refresh and you'll lose your work, so make sure that you are clicking save as you navigate through it. You will not be able to edit your application after submitting after pressing submit. So be sure that you have completed all your fields and uploaded all of your attachments before doing so. And the portal will automatically close at 11:59 p.m. Eastern on the deadline of the 14th, and no late applications will be accepted. So please keep this in mind for your planning purposes. Next slide. So once you're in the application portal, there's several ways to access or start your application. One way to do so is by clicking Open Applications at the top. Next slide. And then you can scroll down to where you can see Understanding the School Food Workforce, USFW subgrant, and click Learn More as highlighted on the right. Next slide. And then start my application. So here will be a brief overview. It's going to be reiterate what you've reviewed in the RFP. And when you're ready and have all of your materials prepared, you can click Start Application. So next slide. So as Jen mentioned, there are eligibility requirements for the subgrant that are highlighted here. You need your unique entity identifier, a lead partner that fulfills one of the three entities described. And as a lead partner, you can only submit one proposal to the subgrant application. So you need to click yes to all three of these eligibility requirements in order to move forward and start your application. Next slide. Once you are into the application portal, you will add and update information regarding yourself as the lead partner, and then any partners that you have in addition to this work. So you are required to at least have the information for yourself. And as I noted earlier, if you add additional partners to your application, they will receive an auto-generated email from our system and be able to create an account. So that way they're able to see the application in the portal, but they will only be able to view and not edit. So only the lead partner will be able to do so. Next slide. So here's what it looks like for adding your narrative information that Jen has just described for you. I'll note in the top right is where you can see the save button. So as you upload information into here, this is where you would want to click save as you do so. A few things related to this. So the templates that Jen has referenced in the RFP are also hyperlinked for you here in the portal. So if you need a reference back to any of the templates that are included with the RFP, feel free to do so, and it will redirect you to where you need to be. In terms of uploading your file, so first for your narrative information, you have the project narrative, and then the budget justification highlighted here. You can upload files using the green button, which is highlighted with the red circle. And these can be either PDFs or Word documents. And if you need to delete an attachment and upload a new one, you may do so by clicking delete attached files. And then when you're ready to add your additional attachments, if you, Jen will go to the next slide, but in the portal, if you click add attachments, it'll take you to your attachment section. This will be where you can add in your project budget. This will accept an Excel format for your budget. You can also upload here your resume or bio sketches up to 5 max, your letters of support, as well as your NICRA, which are not required sections to have. So that is how you can navigate through the application portal. Again, you may save and edit this up until the date of submission or the due date on the 14th. And then once you click submit, just know that you won't be able to go back and edit it. We can reopen your application if needed, but it's helpful if you make sure that you have all of your appropriate attachments uploaded by that deadline to ensure we don't encounter any challenges or troubles. So one more slide, and then we'll open it up and respond to your questions. Next slide here, Jen. So a few tips about submitting a strong application. So again, as we've covered here in our informational webinar today, be sure to review the Understanding the School Food Workforce Subgrant RFP and the website carefully to understand the goal and the priority research areas. Be sure to read the application questions and provide complete answers. And we encourage the use of the provided templates. Be concise and clear in the responses that you provide. It's a relatively short project narrative, so be concise and responsive to the prompts provided. We provided in the RFP the scoring criteria for you, so you have a helpful guide and understanding on what we will be doing when we review your applications. Lastly, be sure to carefully proofread your application and double check all of your attachments in the systems. That way we ensure that we have the correct and final versions of everything that you provide as part of your application. So that's a brief overview of how to navigate the application portal system, in addition to the overview of the RFP today. And we'll open it up for questions now. I know we have a handful that have come in so far, and we will be happy to do so and respond to those. And then lastly, I'll just mention this is an email that is monitored by Jen and our team. And so if you have questions whether it's with regard to the RFP as a whole or the application portal, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to assist.
All right, thank you, Reese, and thank you all for bearing with us as we went through that description of the RFP. So I think that we will start going through just the questions that we have received so far through the Q&A, and then we'll open up more opportunity for people to ask further questions. So I can answer Jennifer's question quickly, wondering if the award is for direct cost or inclusive of indirect costs. So the 50,000 minimum and 250,000 maximum is inclusive of indirect costs. And I do not know the answer to anonymous attendees' question about any creative workarounds in terms of lowering the indirect cost rate. But luckily, I have Sarah Marcotte and Sherry on here from the University of Wisconsin-Madison's budget team who might be able to answer that. Sarah, Sherry, I don't know if you all, okay, so Sarah said your organization or institution may elect to voluntarily waive some or all of the indirect costs if that is allowable under your organization or institution's policy. So hopefully that clarifies. If not, please feel free to continue asking questions through the Q&A, and I'll defer to Sarah, who is our financial management person at the School of Human Ecology at UW-Madison in responding to those questions. So as far as this question I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about how you're imagining the worker-centered point number 6, engaging workers directly in the research process, given the most competitive proposals will be across states or regions. Great question. So one, I'll just remind people that those are 8 criteria that we're using to holistically think about worker-centered research. Certainly, not everyone needs to be hitting on point number 6, but if, for example, a project was involving workers, one thing I could imagine, for instance, is that there are a lot of organizations that have connections to school food service workers. So unions, some of the most heavily representative unions in school food service are National Education Association, SEIU, AFSCME, and Unite Here, but then there are others as well that have pretty significant reach in certain states. So I could see, for example, partnering with some of those unions, or another outlet would be the School Nutrition Association. Includes membership of people across a lot of different occupational categories and school food service in different states, and also has a national association. So I think that there are ways where there can be, I think, strategic kind of collaborations with different organizations that might have a more direct connection to workers if that is a project design that is of interest to people. Beth and Reese, is there anything that you all would add in relation to that question?
No, I was thinking along similar lines. I mean, there isn't one way to do it necessarily, but we definitely wanted to make that an opportunity for people to engage with workers.
Yeah, and I think another way too is workers could potentially be involved in an advisory board. So it could be that maybe they're not directly doing research in terms of participatory research, but that the project is involving them in some other way in terms of providing reactions like to research findings or helping to shape questions that might be used in the research process. So I think that there are a lot of different levels of engagement in terms of what something like that could look like. Okay, so Molly's question, would you please describe what privatization trend is in regards to school nutrition programs? Yes, so what we're looking at here within the context of this subgrant process are school nutrition workers who are participating through their employment. So their schools are participating in the National School Lunch and or breakfast programs. So those are not-for-profit programs that schools can participate in. And those programs are managed by the federal government. So many schools are what's called self-operated, meaning that the local school board is actually managing the school nutrition program directly. But about 20 to 25% of school nutrition programs are actually outsourced to private food service management companies that are typically for profit. So those, I would say, the most kind of big name ones are multinational companies, Aramark, Sodexo, and Chartwells. But there are also smaller private management companies like, for example, Red Rabbit, that might be a little bit more like, well, not a little bit more, a lot more like geographically bound and specific in some of their aims. But any of those contracts that are basically having a private company come in and oversee management of the workers, that's what we mean by privatization trend, is when a school district would be outsourcing all or a part of its workforce to one of these private management companies. Okay, UEI number. It looks like Sarah answered that UEI is for institutions, not individuals. Somebody asked if there's a preference for applications that are submitted with partners. No, I think not at all. I think that if you are an individual researcher or for example, like Beth, if she wasn't involved in this project at the cooperative level of the project team with me and Reese, I could imagine Food Insight Group as an independent, small, like research firm, potentially submitting something. So they've got multiple employees, but they're one entity. So I think that it's really just about the scope of work that you are outlining and ensuring that you have the necessary skills and project time to accomplish the work. I think that there are a number of things, especially working with secondary data, that could be accomplished with much smaller teams. And I think that it's really just making sure that there's strong alignment with the project narrative, budget, and the roles and skills of the project personnel. Okay, so can you clarify? The proposals must be national or across states. As a project across regions within a state not eligible, I'm writing for a large urban school district. Um, this is one of the things that, because this is a cooperative agreement with USDA FNS, and this is the first time that they are funding any kind of study on the school food workforce, we just have to be strategic about how we're using funds. And I think that they would like for information to be more broadly applicable to a variety of different regions across the United States. So I would say that it's not an absolute requirement, but projects that are going to be, for example, if you're writing for a large urban school district, maybe having, you know, two school districts in different areas, like so one in, I don't know, the Northeast and one in like a different region of the country, like the Midwest, for example, I think would make for a more competitive proposal from the perspective of FNS because the funds are relatively limited and we are trying to gather information from a national scope. Anything, Beth or Reese, that you would add to that? All right, so can your company be for profit? Yes, right? I
I
think so.
believe so. I would defer to Sarah. Sarah might
Sarah,
have to clarify.
I can look back at the requirements as
Something
well.
we went back and forth on.
All right, so Sarah's going to confirm this. Layla, we'll get back to you. I'm going to move on to Lucy's question. Assuming there will be multiple subgrants funded covering a diverse geographical scope, how will this research be used? Who will be using it? Will it be mostly used as evidence for policy change? Great question. So one of the ways that we, if anyone's looked at the RFP and seen the long appendix A at the end that has a more robust reporting out of some of our findings from the listening sessions we did this summer, you'll see that we condensed down a lot to get at the research priorities that are presented in the main body of the RFP text. And one of the ways that we did that was by working with our contacts at USDA Food and Nutrition Services in terms of them telling us which things they thought were highest priority from their agency's perspective and most likely to actually lead to change that the agency could implement. So on the one hand, we as the cooperative agreement project team are responsible for summarizing all of the information and making recommendations directly to USDA FNS. But this is actually a field that I would say is really in need of very robust, high quality research. So I would love to see great dissemination strategies around getting this information to people who work in the field, as well as advocates and policymakers. For example, Reese and I were at a gathering in California last week where there were a lot of school nutrition professionals present, and we did a short presentation about school food workforce studies that have been conducted in the last couple of years and provided some overview trends and also talked about some early evaluation results from a program, a workforce development program that Chef Ann Foundation runs. And people were really excited to hear that information. And I think that it's important to recognize that there's a lot of information that hasn't been collected about this workforce. And so on the one hand, I think that just getting this information into the hands of some of the organizations that not only work on these issues currently, but also the federal agencies that are implicated and workers themselves, who maybe are represented by unions and can use this information like for their own organizing purposes, I think are all really important aims of how we actually are hoping this information will be gathered and then translated to different audiences that may use the information. Really, I think the goals of this project are to figure out, first of all, like what does the workforce look like? We know some things about job characteristics that honestly aren't that great. And so part of what we're needing to understand is like, well, where are there pockets where things look better or worse? And I think one thing that came out of our listening sessions pretty strongly is a desire to learn more about school food budgets and how some places were really seemingly able to offer higher wages and hours and benefits to their workers than others, when actually, for those of you who aren't kind of deeply steeped in school food world, the actual money that school food programs have to work with is typically coming just from the federal government in terms of the reimbursements that schools get for providing school meals and whatever students might be paying for meals if they're in a place that does not offer universal free school meals or if they're buying any items a la carte. And there are some states, like California, for instance, that have really, I think, taken a strong leadership role in providing additional funding at the state level. But regardless, in a lot of places, school nutrition departments are expected to be financially self-sustaining based on that money that they're bringing in that's specific to the school nutrition program. So they have a separate budget that's different from the K-12 general education fund. So I think a big thing that we're really wanting to understand is how can we actually improve the quality of these jobs and also ensure that people who are taking these jobs have the skills that they need to be working with the kinds of foods that we're wanting kids to eat, but making sure that we also are really kind of paying attention to the variation that exists currently and what we can learn from it. And I think that's one of the reasons as well that we'd be prioritizing national or regional or at least like sort of cross context comparisons, because there is so much diversity right now in terms of what this overall program looks like. So understanding the constraints of the existing system and like where those kind of boundaries exist, where like, oh, you can't really get much better than what we're seeing right now within this existing system. And then also understanding like maybe where there is specific room to grow, like where there are some of those high road examples, I think are some of the things that I personally find very promising about this approach. Anything else, Beth Reese, that you want to add to that? Preference for quantitative versus qualitative or mixed methods. I would say I'm agnostic in terms of methods. I think whatever fits the research question best. I think that there's certain things like, for example, like some of the descriptive statistics where what we're looking for is likely going to be more quantitative. But then there's, I think, other areas where a qualitative or mixed method approach would be more appropriate. Okay, so how can we connect with others on this call if we think a partnership makes sense to apply together? I think that's one of the reasons why we asked you all to kind of put your names in the chat. If you see someone who you think like, oh, they're interesting, I would encourage you all to reach out and talk about that. I think if you have ideas for what kind of partnership you would ideally like to have, and you just need some help thinking through like who would be a good research partner or who would be a good kind of practitioner partner, that's definitely something that you're welcome to reach out to our project team about in terms of saying like, here's what we're really interested in. Like we have these ideas, like here's what we bring to the table. Like, do you have any suggestions for how we move this project forward? Like we're happy to think through those things. It's certainly not a guarantee that your project would be funded. We have others who are going to be involved in the evaluation process, but it's in our best interest to ensure that we're getting as high of quality of proposals as possible. So we're happy to work with people in that capacity. If that is of interest, just reach out to us through that email that we provided at the end. Is there a preference for collecting data in person versus remote? think so, as long as you have a robust strategy for ensuring that your data collection strategy is sound. Time willing, could you describe some available databases in this space? Yeah, I don't know, Beth, do you want to talk at all about any of the sources that you all used for the urban report?
I mean, part of this work, I hope will help build some databases that unfortunately don't already exist. I mean, that's one of the reasons this is being funded, is that we just don't have comprehensive data nationally on this workforce. So there are certainly some economic databases that our collaborators at Urban Institute use that are outside of my personal area of expertise. You can also certainly look at state level departments of education. Those are typically the state agencies that are operating the federal meal programs at the state level. And those really vary by state on what kinds of data they do collect on the workforce. But I would certainly recommend looking to see what might already be available at the state level, depending on your geography of interest. Otherwise, there's just such a dearth of data. That's kind of the point of this project. So I don't have a lot of other ones in mind, but Jen or Reese, wondering.
Well, I can mention I have spoken with Donovan Lessard from the School Nutrition Association, and he was the lead researcher on the 2020 wages and compensation report that they released. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with school food, the School Nutrition Association is the major trade association representing school food like workers. It tends to be much more highly sort of representative of people who are in director or managerial roles, but they do a lot of data collection of their members. So they're a national organization, but also have state level chapters. And I know that they are open to potential collaborations with researchers on this RFP. I think that they would want to ensure that the research questions were things that the School Nutrition Association is also interested in terms of their mission and their values, and would probably want some sort of small fee for access to their data. But they do a lot of ongoing data collection, not only that specific report that I mentioned, but kind of periodic like surveys that they field to members across the country with school food authorities of really different sizes and demographics. So I think that they're definitely a good group to reach out to in terms of asking about some of their data sources if that's of interest. Okay, I think we're almost out of time, but I think that there was one couple other questions that we can try to get to quickly. So allowable cost to provide participation stipend to school food service staff at school level. Yes, allowable cost. And if anyone has further questions, we are going to compile responses to these questions. But if others come up, you're welcome to email us. And from this point until when the application portal closes on February 14th, we will keep an updated list of frequently asked questions that people can consult to make sure that everyone has access to the same information. So happy to answer any other questions if people have them. Otherwise, I think we're at about time. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. And we look forward to hopefully receiving a lot of really fantastic proposals from you all. And thank you for just taking time to think through, I think not only the needs, but also the potential of this workforce. I think it's really exciting that we're getting the opportunity to do this research. I've worked in the school food space for about 15 years. And for me, it's just a very exciting opportunity that we're finally seeing some real investment in building up our research knowledge of this workforce, and also being invited to think about high road workforce development possibilities. So thank you all for joining us in that collective project. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Please reach out with any further questions, or if you would like to do any connective brainstorming with us. See y'all later.